what up, Long Beach? Welcome back to your home for everything local sports and another episode of LBST, Long Beach Sports Talk. We're talking basketball. As always, I'm co-sports editor JJ Fiddler to my right.
Co-sports editor Mike Gardabasio, and to our right,
Tyler Hendrickson, a.k.a. Basketball Jones. And we've got to thank our sponsors like we do at the start of every show and really everything we do here at GazetteSports.com and the Press Telegram. Got to thank Naples Rib Company and Papa Lucci's. They collectively put the eat in 2nd Street and put the everything in our shows.
Indeed they do. Man, 2015 brought hoop, didn't it? Ever since we came back after the winter break, it has just been basketball all day, every day. And with some surprising results and other not so surprising results, let's dive right into the top story of this year so far. And once again, it's the Poly Jackrabbits, defending CIF and CIF state championship teams, boys and girls respectively. These Jackrabbits are back on top. The boys are number 1 in Division 1 AA for the CIF Southern Section, and the girls are number 2 in Division 1 AA. We will talk about postseason in just a second, but right now, I mean, are these teams better than the teams that won championships last year?
I think I'd definitely say the Poly boys team is measurably better to me. The Poly girls team is certainly much less talented, but I would say are certainly playing much more as a team right now, but their ceiling isn't as high, if that makes sense. I mean, they might be more likely to outperform last year's team on this given day, but they're probably less likely to win an Open Division state championship at the end of the year.
I would agree with that. I think Poly had a lot of players come back from last year's team, most notably KJ Fagan, and they've had a lot of improvement within that program. They certainly lost some talented veteran guards off that team, but I think the Poly boys are clearly a better squad under Shelton Diggs in his 2nd year now. And I think for the Poly girls, it's an interesting question because they are clearly less talented as far as Division I athletes and All-Americans and things like that, but they have meshed together much better and much earlier than that team did. The regular season Poly girls of last year, it would be a very competitive game with this year's team, but by the time they got to that state playoff, that team last year was pretty darn special, and they were the best team in the country when the season ended, in my estimation.
Last year you had a player who's at Michigan now, a player who's at UCLA, and a player who's at USC, or going to be at USC, coming off the bench in some games. I mean, there was literally 6 Division I seniors, plus the number 1 freshman in the country. It was literally, I think, the most talented public high school girls basketball team in the history of American high school hoops. I mean, it was just unreal the amount of talent on that team.
Not to be forgotten, Eric Carmen, who is playing for Cal State Bakersfield, and they're having a good year out there. Don't sleep on them.
So what would be your prediction for this team?
Ooh, it's tough to say. I mean, I certainly see them in the Open Division championship game, most likely with Mater Dei. Those teams are 1-2 right now, basically. There's some other teams in the mix there, but I do think they're good enough to get to that point. We're just kind of going to have to wait and see how they develop, because with a team that's less talented, their development over the course of the year will be key to where they end up.
Well, I think the better question is more or less successful combined than last year for those teams. Because last year you had a CIF championship and an Open Division championship. Both of these teams are going to be in the Open for CIF. The Poly boys were not, but this year they will be, and the girls will be as well. Those are essentially locked down, barring something catastrophic. In the brackets that they lost, they didn't make a championship game. So I think that's kind of the bar. 2 championships and, essentially first or early round exits in the other bracket that they didn't win. So I think that's kind of the bar. Can they collectively do better than they did last year? And I think that they are in better shape to do that, honestly, even though the road will be tougher for the boys, certainly.
But it's worth noting, I think, that there's less top-end talent this year that they're competing against.
Yeah, Stanley Johnson plays for Arizona, fortunately for everyone that isn't a Mater Dei fan in SoCal boys basketball.
That is a high bar to clear, to be sure. What's an interesting story, since they changed how they do these CIF basketball playoffs, is always how can you go under that bar? And how can you stay out of the Open Division? And how can you play against other teams that you think you can beat to raise that plaque at the end of it all? You look at a team like Compton Boys or even Milliken Girls, second place teams in the running for this Moore League title. But honestly, they don't want to be in the Open Division. You got to give them away to be in 1AA.
Or in the case of Compton, a team who certainly they're trying to give them away to be in 2A. They're not even going to be in 1AA. They're going to be in 2A, where they and La Mirada, should they stay in that bracket, would be the clear-cut favorites to get to the championship game. Looks like La Mirada, they are still on that watch list, will remain in the running for an open division berth. But Compton, I think, may have, I don't want to call it tanking, because if you were at the Compton-Milliken game, they certainly didn't lose that game intentionally. But I do think that losses like that one to Milliken are going to successfully keep them out of the open division, which will give them a legitimate shot at a championship.
If I can throw it back to a classic Nate Dogg melody, this is where I want to be. It's right where the Tar Babies want to be, out of the open as one of the top teams in their CIF bracket. Because at the end of the day, the rings are just as shiny if it's 2A or open.
Oh, ask last year's Milliken girls basketball team about that.
Yeah, where they at, though.
Or Poly Boys basketball. I mean, both of the 1AA champions came out of the Moore League, and I kind of think that might continue to happen if we have more league teams that don't get in.
Is that your bold prediction for the podcast?
No, because I think this year the teams that are, I think there won't be any league behinds. But again, Milliken girls basketball team, again, currently if you were to take all the teams that are on the open division watch list out of 1AA, Milliken would go from being ranked 14th in 1AA to being ranked 2nd, with Linwood as number 1.
Well, and we've talked about this before, but I mean, just look no further than last year. Bosco and Compton, they go into the open division for CIF. They lose in the first round. Okay? Then they get pulled down in state, and they're in the same bracket together. They meet in the regional final, and then Bosco wins a state championship. So look no further than the varying degrees of success based on what division that you're in. It's just very challenging, and someone's going to have to, they're just going to have to take that L and move up where they're not exactly ready. They're going to have to punch above their weight class. And obviously we're biased. We don't want our teams to have to do that.
This is perfect time to bring in Chris Trevino, who covers the Suburban and San Gabriel Valley Leagues for us. Chris, you have got a huge game on Friday that kind of falls into what we were just talking about, because it features two of the best teams in that lower division.
Yes, you could argue, because La Mirada is currently ranked number 1 in Division 2A. Mayfair was on the open watch list. They're off it now, but they're still pretty talented because they have arguably the area's best player in Kendall Small, and they're going to go meet head-to-head on Friday in a big league showdown. Like you were saying, La Mirada wants to stay there. This is their best team that they've had in close to 10 years, just because of all the experience they have, and they have a real shot at winning a CIF title with this group of guys. So, they want to stay in that bracket that is very favorable to them, but they're going to get a real test on Friday against Mayfair, a team that's beaten them over the years, just can't get over that monsoon hump, can't get past the storm. So this is going to be a real test for them to see how far they have come during the season. They took their first loss, surprisingly, to a Cerritos team that is surprising a lot of people. So they were pissed off. They blown out opponents 150-49 in those next 2 games.
Woof.
Woof indeed. So they're ready for this game. They have it circled, and they're coming in playing pissed off, essentially. So it's going to be a great game, great atmosphere.
For anybody who's going to go to that game who hasn't seen La Mirada play this year, and they do know that they're going to be watching the Kendall Small show for those monsoons, what should people be watching for with the Matadors as this season comes to a close?
The other Kendall, and that's Kendall Lauderdale. They're big man, 6'6". He's the guy for them, averaging 16 points a game, 7 rebounds, leads both the team in those aspects. But you also got to watch their secondary guy, Vittorio Reynoso Avila. I'm telling you, watch this kid. He's 6'4". He's got a 6'11" wingspan. He's long. He's lanky. He's very smart. Ivy League schools are all over him. He's got a 4.32 GPA, something like that. He's their ball stopper, and I suspect he's going to be on Kendall all night trying to frustrate him and lock him down. He had a really good playoffs last year. He just stepped up, locked down every team's best player in the playoffs, did a really good job, really took a big leap. So you're going to watch out for him. He's averaging about 12 points a game. So he would be the other guy to watch out, as well as Kendall Lauderdale. They're big guys. So, I mean, they have the size advantage, and they're going to go to Kendall, but, watch out for Vito as well.
Speaking of watching, we cannot get out of here without talking about the Open Division watch list. CIF puts together this list so that teams know basically where they're at as they get into the latter part of their seasons. You can get into the Open Division without being on the watch list, but we have yet to see that. The teams that are going to go are probably all the way around the tops of those divisions, and kind of who's headed that way. But one of the biggest surprises is a team that we cover, Los Alamitos, who is 17-1 this year, just starting that Sunset League schedule. They got to take on Edison and Newport Harbor, some tough teams there. But them, St. John Bosco, obviously we mentioned Poly. This open division is going to be very interesting, mainly just on who cuts in.
Well, yeah, and there's currently, it was a huge list on the first one that came out last week. The list that came out this week on the boys' side is at 36 teams, which, again, that means a lot of the teams that are currently on the list are not going to end up being in that bracket. So it'll be interesting to watch that narrow week by week. But that is also why we mentioned teams like Compton and Mayfair that dropped out. The chances of them coming back in, to me, don't seem huge, because at this point, again, if you have 36 teams and you're trying to cut that...
They're whittling it down.
Yeah, you've got to cut basically 20 of those teams out. It's hard to imagine another 1 or 2 or 3 teams jumping back in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think it would take sort of Compton running the table in the Moore League, which would include a win over Poly and things like that, but I just don't necessarily see that happening. Once they drop you off, they do it for a reason. They say, okay, you're kind of out of the running, and it's a slow progression to trimming that down to the final bracket.
On the girls' side, it's been trimmed down to 23 teams, but as we saw last year, I believe it was only 6 teams that went into the Open Division last year. So that could, again, 3 of the 4 teams that are currently listed on that Open Division watch list may end up not getting in. The local teams on the girls' watch list are Long Beach Poly and St. Anthony, and at the moment, that's it. So, again, unless Milliken or Linwood were to jump back on, then those are the only 2 teams that are on there. Should all of the 11 teams somehow in 1AA ahead of Linwood and Milliken go to the Open Division, if they were to do a much expanded Open Division this year, Linwood and Milliken would be ranked 1 and 2 in Division 1AA, as they're the top 2 teams in that division that are not currently on the watch list.
So like I said, we've seen plenty of hoops so far in 2015, enough to see some surprising performances, not only from guys, but from teams. Chris, what is one surprising performance you've seen in the SGVL or Suburban League this year?
I think I'm going Suburban League, and I got to throw it to Evan Leonard and Cerritos. I mean, they returned a lot from last year's core, but they're a guard-heavy team, and you knew they were going to give some teams some problems, but you didn't think they were going to upset La Mirada in that first league game, or that second league game for them. Really big eye-opener. And then Evan Leonard, junior guard, coming back, put up a lot of points last year, but he's just been outrageous. His first 2 games, he put up 40 and 38 points, and he's had 5 games over 30-point margin. So they're 4-1. They've got a chance for that league title. They're a dark horse now because of him and the way they're playing. So that is the surprising thing for me in my Suburban League.
Tyler?
Another guy who gets buckets. I'm going senior in J-Town, Seth Guillory, who was just featured in Sports Illustrated as one of the faces in the crowd. So props to Seth. And the Guillotine is just, he's giving everybody buckets. He's got 20 points in every Moore League game, at least. He's averaging 29 per game. He gave Poly 29 points. He had 41 against Lakewood, including making 11 threes. He's just really making them go. They've played a lot of close games in league, but he's the most likely guy to get on fire. He's playing NBA Jam, and he can carry that team to a win. They upset Compton, started 4-1. They obviously have a big game against Milliken to stay in that title chase.
Yeah, you're going to that game tonight. We're recording this on Wednesday. That's going to be a barn burner, because if you're looking for a wide open game where a shooter can thrive, it's every time Jordan plays Milliken.
Game's open, man, so we're going to see how many 3 balls he gets up and how many go down. But he's shooting and scoring at a ridiculous clip running that offense. And, he's got Jordan on his back. Narrow shoulders, but he's carrying the load right now.
Speaking of small but mighty, I got to go with another little guy in the Moore League, Brandon Wilson. There's a Y in there. That's why I said it like that.
It's pronounced Brendan.
Senior, he's a whopping 5'8", 150 pounds, which is real tough if you're trying to be physical, but he's not worried about it. Quick little kid, averaging 12.5 points, 4 assists, and 3 steals. And I think the biggest thing is just his composure from his junior year to his senior year. He's really captaining that offense this year. And, when Chris Francis tells you he wants you to shoot more, you know you're probably playing pretty well. So Wilson playing incredibly well for Milliken, which is a tongue twister for any other Moore League fans. Mike?
Well, thank you, J. J. There's a period in there. That's why I pronounce it like that. Well, you guys sort of stole the two that I was thinking of initially just because those were the guys that most surprised me. I wouldn't say it's fully a surprise, but it is a surprise to the extent to which he's been good this year as sophomore Zafir Williams at Poly. Having seen him play last year, I know the three of us were kind of big advocates of his, not really on anyone's radar because he'd been coming off the bench. And so I said this year, preseason, I thought he'd be the best sixth man in SoCal, maybe in the entire state. And he certainly bore that out to be true. He was Poly's leading scorer from the bench on a state-ranked team. He did last year jump into the starting lineup where he averaged a double-double, including I think he had 17 rebounds against Compton. So obviously Zafir Williams is just a sophomore. He's 6'5". He also hit 2 3-pointers in that game against Compton. So that's a kid where you look at, he loves rebounding. He's an aggressive rebounder, but he also has range for a guy who's that big. And he's only, the coaches told me he's only been playing organized travel ball for, I think, 2 years. He was just in rec leagues up through middle school. So Zafir Williams definitely one to keep an eye on over the next 3 seasons.
Now is the time for Zafir.
All those players and teams we just mentioned, you can see in action, obviously here in the local area. But if you miss it, get to our YouTube channel and our websites, Press Telegram Sports and GazetteSports.com, to watch all the local basketball action. We were just talking about playmakers and game changers in the high school game. We would be remiss not to mention the Long Beach State teams, both men's and women's, in the teeth of their Big West Conference schedules right now. Ladies first, as always, when we're talking Long Beach hoops, because it's 17-1 at this point for these 49ers. And they will be at home this week in a marquee matchup against the Cal State Northridge Matadors, a game pretty much everybody had circled before the season.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's remained circled. So by saying 17-1, we are deciding to count the win over UC Santa Barbara as a win on the record.
Begrudgingly, the winless Gauchos.
The worst, possibly the worst team in the country, the UC Santa Barbara Gauchos. I believe they're currently 340th out of 349 teams in the RPI, and there's only one other team in NCAA Division I basketball who has yet to win a basketball game this season. Long Beach State beat them by almost 40 points. That does count on the record. I don't think it's going to be that wide of a margin against the Matadors, who are the defending Big West champions and the overwhelming preseason favorites. It'll be a good matchup. This is, if you're a fan of women's basketball, even if you're just a fan of basketball and haven't been to a women's game, this is the game to go to because it's going to be a great clash of styles. They're two very athletic teams who can get up and down the floor. And Long Beach State obviously is 17-1, one of the 5 best records of any team in Division I basketball. If you haven't seen them, you got to come see them. The way they play defense, we've already said all this on the show before, but the way they play is really entertaining to watch, and all 3 of us are going to be there for that game. So we'd love to see you in the stands so that we have some crowd in the background of the video and for Tyler's radio broadcast and everything.
Oh, you can see it when they play, Mike, most definitely. And also make sure that you pay attention to the fact that CSUN has already got 2 losses in the conference schedule. So if Long Beach can hand them a 3rd loss in conference, that might knock them down and force them to miss the Matadors in the conference tournament at the end of March.
Well, it would be an early statement for sure, and you got to protect your home floor and really keep the winning streak alive, because that would make 16 wins in a row. It's been a long time since a Long Beach State team has won that many games in a row, and both teams, the men and the women right now, are cruising. I got a neato stat as we're about to throw it to Chris to talk about the men's team, but did you know, fellas, the last time that the men's and women's teams at Long Beach State had a winning record in the Big West at the same time was 2000-2001. So it's been a while since they've both been good together, and obviously the women are 4-0, the men are 3-1, so they're on track to do that. Chris, you've seen this team up close. Talk about the men, because they're getting right, and they have got a guy in the backcourt.
They have got a guy. All 3 of you will be in the Pyramid on Saturday. I will be up in the Valley at Cal State Northridge.
Womp, womp, womp. You'll be up there with the silhouettes. The Matadome.
The Matadome. Yes, this team is 3-1, second place in the Big West. Great start for them, and they do got a guy, Tyler. Mike Caffey. Just an unbelievable start for him. 3 20-point games, a game winner against Cal Poly with 1.1 second left. I don't think they could envision a better start, maybe pulling that UC Davis win in overtime. But they'll take this, and now they got to go to CSUN, who was supposed to be a top 5 finisher in the league, kind of struggling right now, 2-2 in league. They play UC Irvine on Thursday, so we'll see how they're. And they got a quick turnaround for Saturday with the 49ers. 49ers were off this week, no games this week, so they get a little bit of rest. They took off Tuesday. School's back in session to give them a little break. But this should be a great game. I mean, Northridge has a great guy in Stephen Hicks, averaging 17 points a game, right behind Mike Caffey, top 3 scorer in the league. They also got a good rebounder in Maxwell, who's number 3 in the conference, about 7.8 rebounds. So this should be a great game. It should be a challenging game. It's not going to be a cakewalk for them. And Munson was really concerned about these next 2 road games. They go to Fullerton the week after, where they've had trouble winning. So for him, this is a big road game and test for these 49ers.
Money Mike, it's a pleasure watching him do work this weekend. Obviously, like I've already said, videos of those 2 teams available on our YouTube channel and our websites. That's it. That's all. There ain't no more. Another episode of Long Beach Sports Talk in the books. We've already told you about some of the basketball games we will be going to this week. Stay tuned via the social media to follow live scores throughout those games. Obviously, a thank you to everyone at the Press Telegram and the Gazettes for helping us bring you this coverage and this show and everything else local sports. For Mike, for Tyler, for Chris, for JJ, for Vinny, for everybody else that will be in the stands this weekend. We'll see you there. Take care, y'all.